Thanks for joining in today, folks. I see we've got a lot of people in and registered, and a lot of folks have joined in. I'm really excited about today. My name is Joe Belmonte, for those of you who are first on the webinar this month. And I'm the Business Development Manager for Environmental Construction Solutions. Today, I've got the pleasure of being both the host and the presenter. So jumping right in with a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, you'll notice a chat box over on the right side of your screen. Feel free to say hey and tell us where you're joining in from. You can also ask questions there, and we'll address them at the end. And a lot of you that have been on with us before will know that you will also have information at the end of the webinar for attaining a PDH certificate. You know, we have our ECS logo here at the top, and I just wanted to take a note and talk about Environmental Construction Solutions for those of you that are joining us for the first time today. We're a W.S. Conley company, and some of the other logos you see there include a variety of turf and ornamental and landscape companies. Most notably for today is Chesapeake Valley Seed, which specializes in all sorts of seed mixes and distribution in the job site marketplace. Chesapeake Valley routinely prepares and ships the types of seed mixes that we're talking about today and how you'll fit into your job site. So a little bit about ECS and what we deal with. We have all types of products, and as a premier construction product supplier in the Mid-Atlantic and beyond, also in the Ohio River Valley, we sell everything from silt fence to stormwater devices, anything to help get your job site under control from the design phase right through the project and even after the project is over. I'm really excited that folks are getting back out there and that there's conferences and things of that nature. I know a lot of you all are too. And I'm just wanted to let everybody know that's in Virginia or the Mid-Atlantic. We have booths and are exhibiting at 3 upcoming venues: the Virginia Water Conference in Midlothian, Virginia, in a week or so, put on by the VLWNA, on the Environment Virginia Symposium and at VMI, and the Virginia Solar Summit in Richmond as well. So we're excited to get back out there. If you're going, come on and join us at the booth. So another thing we're really excited about is the demo day that we're having May 11th. Please put that on your calendar and look for information from us. If you're on our email list or follow our social media pages, we'll send you some information in the next week or two on how to actually register. We're going to have over a dozen manufacturers there. We'll have installation guidelines on blankets, hard armor, hydro seating, some silt fence. We're going to do lunch and giveaways. And this is at a very convenient location right off of 95 in Fredericksburg, near where the CarMax is, if you're familiar with that location. So be on the lookout out there. Really excited to have folks there and do a demo day. We've done those in the past years ago and are excited to get out there and get going. So let's jump right into what we're talking about today, native or reclamation seed mixes. I'm actually going to turn my video off here so you can see the entire screen while I'm talking, and we talk about which one of these is right for my job site, and give you a little heads up right here at the beginning. It's a decision that obviously a group of stakeholders will have to make, but in learning about natives and reclamation seed mixes, you can oftentimes get a feel for which one might be best for your job site. A little bit about myself, since I'm presenting today. I've got about 20 years in the construction industry and over a decade in erosion control and vegetative establishment. I am a certified E&S stormwater program administrator for DEQ and spoken at regional and national IECA events. You know, I worked for about 7 years before coming on board at Environmental Construction Solutions with a national seed company. So I'm well versed not only in the sales and specifications of these seed mixes, and how they go to market and how contractors put them in the ground and get job sites vegetated, but I'm also well versed on the procurement side of things from the seed company, working with farmers. A lot of the pictures I'll show you, I've been out to farmers that are growing seeds in some native seed areas and even out in Oregon and the Willamette Valley, where a lot of the fescue and clover is grown that comes to market in the Mid-Atlantic. So that's just a little bit about my background. And the purpose really of today is as the name implies, is really to understand the difference between these native seed mixes and reclamation mixes, and maybe some of the other job site challenges that might help you pick which one might be best for you. It's geared towards civil engineers and contractors, and municipal folks usually get a lot out of these as well. So in any big job site that we have, what is the challenge as we take bare dirt most of the time and create a place where water is channeled to sediment ponds, and sediment is tried to be kept on site, and you have to grow vegetation in that while all of that is happening. Steep slopes are oftentimes hard to get vegetation established. With the influx of solar farms in Virginia, you're going to see some pictures there later on. Even flat open areas can create sheet flow really rapidly in a big rainstorm and have erosion on otherwise flat areas. You have to deal with temporary versus permanent seeding, unexpected construction, loss of sediment from your site, poor soils, poor fertility, lack of an understanding of fertility. All of those things are challenges we have in trying to get vegetation established on a job site. So when we started talking about native seeds, we'll look at those first, and native seed mixes, and we'll delve into pollinators a little bit, which is a hot topic right now. I like to show folks that seeds are a crop, and we don't think about them like that all the times in our day-to-day routines of what we do. But farmers grow them, they get the seed heads out, they bring them to market. It's really no different than grain or corn or soybeans or peanut or cotton or anything else you see, driving by the farm fields that you live near or go by on the highway. And crop yields are oftentimes good or bad, or hampered by weather or rotating crops or any number of things. And when you especially talk about native seeds, they're oftentimes very different in size and color. And I think that's interesting, and we'll talk a little bit about why later on. But this is some native seed mixes, and you just see the variety of sizes and colors that goes in to those buckets there that are going out. And this, I believe, is a wetlands mix for the Mid-Atlantic, just to give you an idea there. To put that into perspective, talking about the farming side of things, this is butterfly milkweed production, and so you actually have to grow these flowers just like you would, or these native plants just like you would any other crop, and you have to bring them to harvest. And some of these are actually done in very small increments. Some of the native seeds that are sold in the marketplace, the entire year's crop could be, a couple hundred acres of native plants that they're getting seed heads from. Oftentimes they're done by hand. They are harvested by hand or by smaller tractors, and they're taken to market, to seed cleaning places, and they're really, I don't want to say it's antiquated. It's just very old school, and because of the nature of the native seeds in general, as compared to something like fescue going to market or a more traditional crop. You can see, speaking of that, these are fields of fescue, and they're things like fescue, clovers, perennial ryegrasses, rye grains, things that are in contractors mixes or erosion control mixes or reclamation mixes, that are not native that we talk about. They're grown on a larger scale and more like traditional row crops. You can see there, they're cut, they're swathed, they're combined, and then they're generally taken to a large company seed cleaner where you get the seed heads out, and they're packaged and put out for production. And so, when you talk about, native grasses and native forbs, what really are they compared to some of the other things you see out there. Grasses and wildflowers that are native to our area. They were here. When we say native with plants, we mean before European settlers. So they're not turf grasses. They're not things like fescue or ryegrass or even Bermuda. Bermuda grass is very rampant in America, especially in the transition zone and in the Southeast. But that was actually brought to America through ships and in the toes and clothes of enslaved Africans went through the slave trade. So again, most of the seeds that we use on our lawns or in our on our ball fields are really not native to the area. And so that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about natives. And why do we want them to use them is because they've lived here already for years and years. So they require really low input. They do not require fertilizer or pesticides or supplemental irrigation. They're adapted to the soil that they live in through millions of years of basically evolution. They provide a great habitat for birds and small mammals, rabbits, grouse, foxes, all of the above. They're a big source for pollinators. Pollinators is a big buzzword right now. We're going to talk about pollinator mixes and pollinator friendly mixes and some of the scorecards that are out there that states have with regards to the pollinators and bees. And while you talk about low maintenance and low cost, if you design a stand of native seeds and native seed mixes correctly, the price per pound of native seeds is much higher than say a contractor's mix or a reclamation mix, but the cost savings throughout the life cycle cost could be lower because you'd have to mow it more. You'd have to mow it less. You'd be less upkeep. That's what you really get when you talk about natives in construction and natives in parks and recs applications. There's a picture I'll show you and talk about how golf courses are using natives in some of their boundary areas to have to mow less and to have to use less fertilizers as well. So when we think of native grasses, we generally think about quicker to establish cool season grasses. We think about wild rye and rushes and sedges. If you've been in the construction world or the specification world, you may know these. You may have seen these on seed specs and native seed mixes. And you think about warm season grasses, you think more about blue stems and switchgrass and deer tongue, and we see a lot of those in the Mid-Atlantic because, as we'll talk later, we're in what's called the transition zone, where both cool season grasses and warm season grasses grow, and that's the same with flowering and pollinator species as well. So cool season, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, are generally grasses that do best in the fall and the spring, and not in the hot summer. Whereas warm season, something like switchgrass and deer tongue, you're going to plant those in April or May, and they're going to flourish in the hot, humid summer in the Mid-Atlantic areas. And so you have just kind of some industry terms when we're talking about native seeds and native grasses. In most of our viewing area there is USDA Region 1, and understand kind of native versus naturalized. Naturalized or non-native, but sometimes they're used in native mixes because they persist without interventions. Ecotype is a type of native that's found in a defined geographic area, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's important later on when we talk about seed tags and substitutions and specifications. Variety is a descriptive term that divides native species into groups, and then there's species indicators that there's going from left to right here with these acronyms are obligate upland, facultative wetland, and facultative upland. And when you talk about those those terms, this is really what they mean. You take, for example, a facultative species. That means it has an equal chance of finding it in really anywhere, upland where it's very dry or wetland where it's typically wet. Then you have obligate upland, facultative upland. It's just basically a description of where these native seeds are found in general, where they're found, what type of terrain they're found in, I guess would be a better way to describe it. And so, after all of that, sometimes people say, wow, that's a lot of stuff to graphs. That's a lot of acronyms. I'm kind of confused. Can you simplify it? And really what native seed specifiers and native seed companies, and I see, one of the questions was, just backing up a minute, that are these seed producers located in Virginia? Most of them are not. Most of the fescue and clovers and things in reclamation mixes are from either the Midwest or out in the East Coast and the Pacific Northwest. When you buy fescue for your yard, it's typically grown in Oregon or Washington State and shipped to the East Coast. Chesapeake Valley Seed that we own is headquartered in Maryland, but they work with native seed farmers all throughout the East Coast. And so some of those pictures of the native seed operations were really probably not in Virginia, but in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, things of those nature. But so they're brought into market and sold through ecotypes into the state that you're in. So anyway, back to kind of upland, lowland, and wetland, and talking about the differences. Native seed companies will create mixes to make it easy that are full of species that will, and you buy them based on the terrain that you need to specify them in. So, an upland mix would be like a meadow mix where it's very dry in a high area. A wetland mix is something that is in a wetland area, or maybe in the bottom of a sediment pond where you think water is going to be all the time, even if it's wet and damp, even when it doesn't rain. You're looking at wet feet if you're standing there. And lowland is an area that dries up when it doesn't rain. So think about these terms in the sense of naturally occurring in the geography, but also think of these terms in the sense of man-made areas through construction and how we specify them in things like sediment ponds, sediment basins, riparian mixes, which we'll talk about, which are on waterways, and that's really how you determine what you may need to use. So when you talk about meadow mixes, just kind of moving on into the different types of native seed mixes, they're a blend of grasses and forbs, and forbs really is just a fancy way to say flowers. And so you're looking at 75 to 85% grasses and 15 to 25% flowers. And the flowers have more seeds per pound than the grasses, so they have they might be, the flowers might be higher priced. And then you mix them together based on planting rates, but the average seeding rate on something like a meadow mix might be about 20 pounds per acre. And then when you get into pollinator mixes and also meadow mixes like this, you can specify, or oftentimes native seed companies will create mixes where you have warm season and cool season grasses flourishing at different times of the year, but also flowering at different times of the year. So you'll have some color both in the spring and the summer and the fall, and possibly even in the winter. So speaking of that riparian mix, what exactly is that? We hear that a lot, and what's it used for? Riparian are areas adjacent to rivers and waterways, as we know, and so this is sometimes called a buffer mix or a riparian mix, and it's really kind of a let's throw the kitchen sink at it to try and get something to grow. But I don't say that in a bad way. I mean it in a good way. If you think about, a river or stream bank, oftentimes there's a little bit of elevation change where the water goes down to the or comes back up from the where the water normally resides at, up to where you might stand on the side of a river or a stream. And so at any given time, something that you plant along that riparian area, some of it might be dry all the time, some of it might be wet most of the time, some of it might be wet when it rains and the river's high, and other times it may be dry. So when I say that they mix a bunch of different varieties in there, both wetland and upland, and kind of throw the kitchen sink at it, I actually mean it, that it's very successful typically, and that's really the thought process behind the riparian mix. And when you talk about pollinators or wildflower mixes, it's similar to a meadow mix, but they're generally speaking 100% flowers. There's really not any native grasses in it. And, they're a mixture of upland and facultative species. They're really in non-floodplain flat areas. The flowers are typically more expensive, but with the seeding rate, you're talking about seeding with 10 to 15 pounds per acre. And again, you can mix them based on the time of the year, cool season, warm season, based on not only what time they grow best, but what kind of color you're going to get at any given time during the year. So a little bit about pollinator mixes and the buzzwords that comes with that in the construction industry, and specifically in the solar industry in Virginia. This is a screenshot of the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation's Virginia Pollinator Smart program, and specifically how they would like it used on solar farms if municipalities want to do that. And this is a really, in the grand scheme of things, a great program. It came out a few years ago, and admittedly, I'll say, that the state may have, in some instances, I wouldn't say that they put the cart ahead of the horse, but maybe beside it. And what I mean by that is that, they put this thing out. There's a grand rush of solar farms coming to Virginia, and a lot of folks, municipal folks, who really don't understand the challenges of growing native seeds, a lot of times are out there, well, we want a bee-friendly solar farm, or we want a bee-friendly this or that or the other. And there's, a lot of times not an understanding of what that takes between the municipality, the local inspector, the general contractor, the design team. Native seeds really take a lot longer than an erosion control mix or a contractor's mix, or what we'll talk about, a reclamation mix, to get established. A native seed mix or a pollinator habitat really takes 2 to 3, sometimes 3 to 5 years to get fully established, if that makes sense. So it's going to take some time to really do that, and you have to put in nurse crops, like we'll talk about in a little bit. So there's a lot of folks that are trying this. Some of them are trying it successfully, some of them unsuccessfully. But what's interesting about this, and why I bring it up, is that in general, I do think it's a great thing, because I think it's gonna it's going to be a launching pad in a lot of states. And if you're listening in with us, not from Virginia, check with your state about pollinator programs or native grass programs on job sites and see what you find. And, I'll give you a little example of what I mean. We've met with 2 energy companies in the last year, and they weren't working on a solar farm, but they were doing something on an old transmission rehab line. Another was doing something at one of their main headquarters. And they were asking us about native seed and native seed establishment, and maybe trying to come up with a specification for what they were trying to do. And in talking to them, it was obvious that they had looked into this Virginia Pollinator Smart program and were using it kind of as a guideline when talking to us, or a guideline of what they were trying to do. And, so I think what's going to happen is the scorecard that this program has for job sites might get extrapolated and taken into other areas, with anything from private projects. And so, I think that's a good thing, that we're getting pollinators out there and talking about them and trying to grow them. So when you talk about them, understand that they're, like I said, they're slower to establish, but can be used in very low maintenance, and you can use them in buffer zones or in open areas, 1 to 10 acre increments. I mean, you can certainly use them in areas larger than that, but consider that, municipalities could create pollinator habitats for educational and community awareness purposes. Private locations that have uh, uh, geography or have buildings or any number of things in multiple states could have pollinator mixes or pollinator habitats across multiple sites for their sustainability goals, or to put into their yearly programs, any number of things. So and to kind of give an example of that, that top left corner is Wolf Trap up in Northern Virginia, and that's a pollinator garden that's part of their trail there. And then the very similar to that is a golf course that has taken their open areas or their areas between two holes or behind maybe tee boxes, and they've planted these pollinator mixes. And so it does a lot of things. They can talk about how they're increasing pollination of bees, but the other thing it brings to the table from the standpoint of a municipal based or even a private golf course is that's less area they have to mow on a regular basis once they get it up and established. It's less manpower. A lot of folks, as we know, are having trouble hiring people nowadays, especially for labor intensive jobs. It's less fertilizer. It's less lime. So it's something that could take a year or two to create on a golf course, but then it would essentially be self-sustainable for the long term, and the benefits there would be really outstanding for any number of reasons. So that's kind of moving on from kind of what native mixes are and what different types of them there are, and to talk about reclamation mixes. I would ask you, if you a lot of folks haven't really ever heard the term reclamation mixes and what they are. And I would just ask you if this is the first time you've heard the term reclamation mix, or maybe you jumped on today because that term made you inquisitive. Shoot a note in the chat box and just say, yeah, I had heard of that, but I don't know what it is. And it basically comes from the theory of getting vegetation established on reclaimed lands. Anything from old coal mining to old landfills, and that's how reclamation mixes were born and came up with the name. And so, just as a guide here, or an actual picture to see, that's a native pollinator mix on the left and a reclamation mix on the right. And so what's in a reclamation mix? It's species that aren't native, but that they do well on low input sites. They're quicker to establish. So think about raw dirt, raw land with no vegetation on it in a construction site. And you want to use something better than just a contractor's mix that is really only fescue and ryegrass that is going to struggle once it gets up and through the summer. These are things that are basically non-native, but that do well in areas. They persist well, and they are created. These mixes are created for the long-term low establishment and stabilization and erosion control on job sites. So again, think about bare dirt. These could be low mow areas, energy sectors, pipelines, solars, landfill covers. You can see there from left to right at the bottom, that's actually a reclamation mix that was mowed on a regular basis. But you can see there in the far right, the clover that's actually coming in. And that's one of the things that's integral to a reclamation mix, typically in the transition zone. We'll talk a little more about that. But these are some of the common, seeds that we see in reclamation mixes in the Mid-Atlantic and, the Ohio River Valley. And depending on if you go down far in the southeast or the northeast, they're going to change a little bit. And so they're broken down into cool season and warm season. And if a lot of you have taken to the keyboard, just hold off for a minute, because I understand that in your area, some of these may be considered invasive. Some of these species do well in certain states, but in other areas they may be considered invasive. In Virginia, we've really gone away from using Lespedeza, because it just really takes over. And then when you cut it, it's kind of a stalky plant. And if you cut it too low, there's a lot of actual bare spots around it. So when you think about reclamation mixes, you think about cool season again and warm season, and you're talking about fescues, red tops, Bermuda grass in the warm season side of things. Weeping love grass is commonly used because it's low growing. Lots of clovers are oftentimes used. And then in the annuals up here at the top are used as a nurse crop. And we'll talk about what nurse crops are and why they're important. So a lot of the reclamation mixes or erosion control mixes, and at the end of the day, a reclamation mix, you could say, is a fancy erosion control mix that's really kind of geared specific to your area. And so a lot of them were born out of by seed manufacturers, they were born out of local erosion and sediment control handbooks or environmental quality type handbooks. And like, for instance, in Virginia here, we have the Virginia Erosion and Sediment Control Handbook, which we all know is a bit outdated, but the reality is I think the seeding aspects of that are still pretty well up to date. And so, it's broken down into the mountain, Piedmont, and coastal area, and what you plant at the time of year and how much. And then you take that and seed companies will basically create those in stock that they can keep in their warehouse, and contractors will use them on private projects. Oftentimes they'll use them on DOT type projects and public projects, but they have to be approved and shown how what's in them are similar to the VSET's handbook or your local state requirements. But this one, for example, is one that we've sold for years, and it's got this is a fescue and Bermuda grass and ryegrass, and millet is the nurse crop in there. There's only 7% there. Ladino white clover is great for an erosion control mix because clover is a legume like a peanut. It actually takes atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and pumps it back into the soil. So if you're a yard person that keeps a nice yard and you have a stand of clover in your yard and you don't put something like 2,4-D on it or a herbicide on it, that's why that clover in your yard is going to be bigger the next year than it is this summer, because it's actually pumping nitrogen back in the ground. And the stolons on clover really kind of hold the immediate ground cover together for erosion control purposes. And then what the other aspect that's great with these reclamation mixes is that they are mixed all together and can be bought on a per acre basis. As if we go back to the handbook, say, well, you need to put 128 pounds of fescue per acre. And so what this is done is you think, well, why is there so much more fescue than weeping love grass? Well, so, if you plant 200 or 250 pounds of that, and you figure out per acre, and you figure out what 2% weeping love grass is, and 7% foxtail millet, basically over that acre, the amount of those varieties would be in tune with the per acre rate of those species of grasses and clovers. And so you're not putting too much of one, too much of another. It gives the contractor the ability to just say, hey, we need to put 5 bags of this per acre in the hydroseeder, or 5 bags for this per acre in the hopper. And it's really just for ease of construction purposes. And so again, reclamation mixes they're a little bit easier to understand than native mixes, but they're often used in job sites and specified as well throughout our area and even further. So again, that's just the difference in the two there. You see the reclamation mix on the right-hand side and the solar panels, that's going to have to be mowed, or it's going to grow up over the panels. It's not going to have to be mowed every week like your yard at home, but once or twice a year whereas the native pollinator mixes are going to take a lot longer to get established. But once it's done, in theory, you could mow them less, or some of those native species even have a height that's below the lowest point of the solar panels. So a good part of any of the of these mixes is the role of nurse crops in these mixes. And a nurse crop is an annual crop. And just to make sure we all know what an annual crop is, that means it's not perennial. It doesn't continue to live year after year. It is grows for a year and then it dies. Okay, so things like rye grain, annual ryegrass, annual bluegrass, or cool season annual crops. Millet and some other ones are annual warm season crops. And what you do is you plant these in conjunction with your native seed mixes and your reclamation mixes. And what they do is they really they establish really quickly. They hold the soil, they protect from raindrop impact, because as a heavy rain comes down, it's being dissipated by these taller grasses. It provides a little shade for some of the other varieties that may not need to bake in the sun all day. They help stabilize the soil temperature. As they die, they increase carbon and biomass in the soil so that the other varieties that are there can really do well and grow for the long term. They also reduce nutrient loss, because as they're being fertilized in a reclamation sense, if you need to, or you need to go back over an area, that nutrient fertilization is going to stay there rather than run off more. And so that's what we're looking at. And so you can see there, this is at the side of a hill at a landfill with a reclamation mix. And this is, say, maybe 6 months after it's been planted. And you can see that it's on the side of the hill, but it's not thick. If you can imagine being there and having a drone and taking a picture from up top, you'd be able to see some of the other varieties. You can see there a little bit of ground cover showing, it's not so thick that it's not going to choke out the other varieties that are trying to grow. And just as an example of that, here's a close-up. You can see some of the clover starting to grow in, some of the fescue, and some of these taller shoots are probably the nurse crops that are growing up taller. And then and so as a result of that, these are typically the nurse crops that are used in Virginia. And a couple things to note about that is, you look at annual ryegrass between August 15th and November 15th and March 1st through May 15th. It's a spring and fall. And then when you get into the winter, you're really planting something like oats or barley or wheat. And then in the summer, when you're planting a foxtail millet. So, keep in mind that this is from the Virginia Sediment and Erosion Control Handbook. This is also temporary seeding requirements. So understand that the difference between temporary seeding versus long-term seeding, a lot of times people will plant one cultivar of just annual ryegrass on a large area, and then when they're done, they'll come back and plant their permanent seeding. What I'm talking about with the role of nurse crops, to understand, is that these nurse crops have to be combined with permanent seeding techniques in erosion control and reclamation mixes and in native seed mixes. And one of the things to note is that, if you look at the summer, the traditional use is through August 14th. Well, I don't know if it's, depending on what you believe, if it's climate change or just, that it's generally hotter for a period of time. A lot of times from August 15th to September 15th, it's pretty much still like the summer in a lot of part of the mid-Atlantic. So you need to be able to consider what you're working on with your job site as an engineer. If you're approving these mixes, or if you're a GC that's approving these mixes, and maybe your subcontractor has to send you seed tags every day. Oftentimes, on September 1st, we're recommending still using millet as a nurse crop. It could grow up half of its size and die out before the winter, but still do better than, say, an annual ryegrass is. Sometimes you mix a little bit of both as that nurse crop in that time of year. The other thing to consider in this element is that, you know, if you have a summer mix out there and a contractor has a pallet left and it's August the 15th and he's got 5 bags of seed left, you know, there's a lot of times the local engineer or the local inspector will have to approve use past those dates of those nurse crops, and that's fine if it's hot enough. You know, there's really no sense in not letting the contractor use those few remaining bags on a project, because if they have to keep them until the next summer, the germination is going to go down. They may have to get tested again. So that's done a lot on job sites, and it's just fine. The other thing to consider is that cover crops are not natives. They're not native seeds. They are a lot of times they're grains, a lot of times they're grasses. So in reclamation mixes, they're going to be in the bag, but in native mixes, they usually are not, because a native seed mix company is going to specify a native mix, and they know that they're going to mix it with all natives, and then they're going to put on their submittal and on their specification, use so many pounds of this or that as a nurse crop. Well, oftentimes contractors get the specification through 3 or 4 people, and they don't even know what a nurse crop is, or they don't know which one is recommended. And they go out there with a native seed on a wetland area or even on a larger area that's pretty expensive proposition, and they seed it with no nurse crop. And if anything does come up, it doesn't last, or any number of things that could hamper the growth of that. And the opposite of that is beware too much nurse crop. You know, this is a stand of millet that looks more like a farmer's field of millet than a job site. And this millet was used in conjunction with a erosion control or reclamation mix on a site. And what's happening is it's so thick that none of the other cultivars are going to be able to grow. They're going to be choked out. And this, while it looks like good cover right now, when that dies in a year, you're probably not going to have a lot of vegetation left. And this happens often because, especially with a lot of what's going on with pollinator smart programs in different states, you have a misunderstanding of the time frame it takes to get a native seed mix up and growing. So you have somebody that's planting a native seed mix, and an erosion control inspector comes out and says, well, there's not enough cover. And the contractor goes, well, it's a native seed mix. It's going to take 3 years. And the erosion control inspector goes, well, there's not enough cover. And they kind of have this back and forth and don't know what to do. And somebody goes, well, you know, put 20 pounds per acre more millet down or more ryegrass down if it's in, you know, the October or November. And then what happens is that chokes out what's already grown. So this is so the use of nurse crops, either none at all or too much, is something that oftentimes hampers both a native seed mix and a reclamation mix. And I would say, as both a specifier from the top down all the way down, from a subcontractor, somebody who is in the field, in the trenches doing this work, they need to have a real understanding of that and make sure everybody on the job site is on the same page. The other thing to consider when we talk about these mixes are understanding the differences between bulk seed and pure live seed. So, and if you're multitasking, like I imagine some folks do during these webinars, take a minute and, you know, really listen to this, because when it's important. When you buy most reclamation mixes or contractor mixes, you're buying bulk seed, just like you might go to a big box store in the spring and get some grass seed to plant in your yard. You'll probably get a 50-pound bag of seed sold as bulk seed with a 50-pound net weight to the bag. So if you look at all the seed tag info and the germination rates, you could use the formula on the bottom of the screen here to figure out the pure live seed in the bag. Pure live seed is the living seed of the intended crop that will germinate from a seed bag and accounts for the weight of the bag that's made up of impurities, weed seed, other crop seed. Percent pure live seed in a bag varies depending on the amount of pure seed in the bag, as well as the germination rate of that seed. So it's different from time to time. So most commercially sold contractors mixes and reclamation mixes, as well as the seeds you buy as a homeowner to plant in your yard, has a high enough germination rate, and it's easier just to buy bulk seed and that you know most of it will germinate. So to put this in layman terms, you'll buy 100 pounds of Scotch turf builder for your yard, and you don't worry about the percent of pure live seed in the bag. Seed tags are regulated by the state in which the seed is sold, and usually by its Department of Agriculture. But a bag of seed also contains inert matter such as dust, chaff, sometimes seed coatings, sometimes other crop seed, and pure live seed of the desired species. Like I mentioned, it's actually seeds you're trying to buy. So most native seed and native seed mixes are sold as pure live seed. That's why this is important to note. Native seeds aren't geneticized like fescues and turf seeds or clovers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be native, right? And remember, some native seeds are harvested by hand or by non-traditional farming methods. So there may be more inert matter in the bag, more dust, more minuscule twigs, things like that. Also, native seeds have a lower germination rate naturally because they're not farmed like grain or corn. Germination rates sometimes like 60 or 70%. So all of this is very normal and fine for native seed mixes. But buying native seed and pure live seed ensures that you're getting enough viable seed in the bag for what you're buying. For example, let's say you need 10 pounds of lance leaf coreopsis that you're going to cover an entire acre with. You want to know that you're purchasing 10 pounds of pure live seed in the bag. Another reason why this is important is that most native seed specifications call for pure live seed. Sometimes new contractors don't understand this, and they may get a quote from a native seed company in bulk seed. So if you're working on a project and you have 3 bids for planting native seed mixes on an acre, and one is significantly less, it may be worth confirming with the low bidder that they bid the project using pure live seed quotes from their seed vendor. So that's a lot to kind of understand there, and we get even more into that with understanding the seed tag and the submittal process. The submittal process is a source of supply that a native seed company will come up with at the time of a project is going to bid and say that we can provide this. But oftentimes at the time the job site actually happens a year later, especially with native seeds, and even with reclamation mixes now, because the native seed or just the seed industry in general is in turmoil due to droughts and bad harvest years, things of that nature. If you don't know that, go and check out a local landscape supply store, and you'll see that a lot of seed is very limited and it's gone up in price a lot. So again, you may have to look at substitutions at the time of planting, and keep in mind that if you specified something and then a year later it's actually being planted, you're going to have to get maybe the municipality inspector involved, the engineer involved, the contractor involved to say, hey, this is what was specified, but this is what I can get my hands on right now. So that's a big deal to consider. And a lot of that is based on the availability. So just as we start to kind of wrap up here and talk about these different seed mixes and talk about, the challenges on job sites, one of the things I often do is talk about the similarities between a job site and a football field. And, in Virginia and in most of our viewing area where we ship to, and most of the people are on these webinars, you're in the transition zone and you plant cool season plants in the spring and fall, and warm season grasses in the winter, because they both can survive and thrive in that green transition zone portion of the map. Just like a Virginia Tech or an NC State plants Bermuda, they have a Bermuda-based football field, but, by the last home game, when they typically beat UVA, there's a joke for a couple people if we've got Tech folks on board here. But that Bermuda would be dormant. So the turf grass managers oversee that with a ryegrass. And so, a lot of folks, I'm amazed, on construction sites really don't have any idea of what that is or what cool season or warm season grasses are. Maybe they have lived somewhere outside of the transition zone Maybe it's a result of that we're just not in a agronomic society anymore. But that's something that I always bring about, is talking about the transition zone on job sites and knowing what to plant at what time of year, and make sure you're planting the right thing. The other thing I like to talk about a lot, and that I see less and less of being done, is soil testing for your fertility. This is a job site where they had seeded, and they asked us to come out and look, and I said, well, let me see your soil test, and they really didn't have any. And so remember that a lot of times contractors will bid things based on what are in state erosion control handbooks. And if you look at them, like in Virginia's, for example, the Virginia Sediment and Erosion Control Handbook calls for a soil test, and it calls for fertilization and liming to be done pursuant to the soil test. But then it says, if you didn't do a soil test, put out 500 pounds of this and 1,000 pounds of that. And what's happened over time is that minimum amount has kind of become the bidding process. And that's a real struggle in these large construction job sites, because they're typically have very poor soil. The topsoil has been stripped away, and you're talking about a pH of 4.5 or lower, and you need it to get it up to 6.5, and those minimum amounts just aren't going to do it. So soil test is what I tell folks all the time. And the other thing is really preparing the soil. A lot of times in construction, the temporary seeding is done, or even construction vehicles go over stuff, and things are really compacted. And you would be surprised at the number of places I go out to do a soil test on a job site where folks say, well, can you help us out? Nothing will grow. And I take my little soil test probe, and I've told folks this before, but I have to get down on my knees and really kind of bang into the ground like I'm digging for gold there to get enough dirt in a Ziploc bag to do a soil test. And if you can't stick a shovel in the ground relatively easily, you're going to have trouble establishing vegetation. And then, couple that with a large project with one of these expensive native seed mixes, you could have some really concerned stakeholders really quickly. So when you talk about establishment and maintenance with these, you need to understand what you may round up for weeds and what you may not want to kill. Understand different planting methods. You can see there on the bottom of the screen from the left to the right, there's a hopper on a tractor, there's a hydroseeder, and there's a drill seeder. When you talk about native seed mixes, a hydroseeder or a drill seeder really is the way to go. Sometimes that's a more expensive proposition with regards to the bidding process, but if engineers would consider even putting that in their specifications, they would get better results. Because if you can imagine going back to that picture that I talked about with all those different sizes of seeds in a reclamation or a native seed mix, and you put it in that hopper in that picture on the left, and that tractor is bouncing up and down, going back and forth, all the more lightweight seeds are gonna come to the top. And so I've literally been out on job sites and landfills where they've taken a reclamation seed mix and put it in a hopper, and you can literally walk down the length of the job site where successful vegetation has happened, but there's like a stand of fescue here, and then there's the clover, and then there's the Bermuda, and it's all come out all at once. And so a hydroseeder is a wonderful thing because it mixes up a slurry, and a drill seeder is wonderful because it actually most of them that are used in native seeds or reclamation mixes, they have different boxes, and you put up on the top there, and you put the seed in the apparatus based on whether it's a grain or a flower, and that's mostly dependent on size, and then it's actually injected into the ground. The other thing to consider when you're using these methods is how deep your seeds need to be planted. So if you put fescue in your yard and you go and you're a weekend warrior, and you go and you plug your yard with an aerator, and you get a 3/4 inch drop in the ground, and then you drop your fescue in there, well, guess what? That's actually too deep for a lot of native seeds like and even reclamation seeds like Bermuda and clover. So if you just punch holes in the ground that are actually too deep, a lot of these mixes won't do well at all. You need to prepare, obviously, for what Mother Nature gives you. And if it gives you none, you need to water. And you need to know when to mow and when not to mow these native seed mixes and reclamation mixes, because sometimes if you mow them too early, you'll actually really be doing more harm than good. And you need to plant by per acre rates. I know I'm jumping around here a little bit on these bullet points, but you need to plant by per acre rates, not machinery rates. And what I mean by that is there's a tremendous amount of hydroseeders being used in construction today. They're efficient. They're wonderful machines. They've really grown in the last 10 or 15 years. And some of you have seen our webinars. I think it's one of the best ways to seed. But, a large hydroseeder with, that holds 3,000 gallons of water, a lot of those contractors that own them kind of made their bones on roadside work and temporary seeding. And they'll say, well, my machine covers an acre. Well, if you can only put, so much of material in that hydroseeder, and the manufacturer's rate is twice that, well, then you're really not covering the acre like you need to be. So that's what I mean by plant by per acre rates, not machinery rates. And if you're working on job sites and have questions about specifically what to put in the hydroseeder and how much it would, what area it would cover, or a drill seeder, we can help you with that as well. So, there's also what's used a lot of times in native seed is something that's called the burn down method. And this is where you kill off the existing vegetation. Maybe it's an old contractor's mix or a reclamation mix, and then you plant a native seed over top of it, and that dead grass will kind of become some organic matter and a kind of a seed bed for native seeds. And that's oftentimes a good way to get pollinators and native grasses grown on a very large area. So, now that you've heard all this, where can you find help and what can you do? State erosion control handbooks can help you. Land grant universities like Virginia Tech or NC State or your local land grant university typically has some sort of research or something going on, or handbooks about forage and native seed mixes. USDA and NRCS websites are great places to find help. Soil and water conservation districts as well. Seed companies also have a lot of information on their websites, and I'll just give a shameless plug here for Ernst Seed. It's interesting in the seed industry. They're actually a bit of a competitor of ours, but we work together well. The seed industry is, I don't want to say backwards, but a lot of times it's somewhat inbred. People joke. People have to sell their inventory to help each other out and things of that nature. And so Ernst Seed is really the king daddy rabbit, the end all be all of native seed companies. And their yearly book that they put out talking about the seeds that they sell, the first 10 or 12 pages really talk about, it's a great planting guide. And if you go on their website, they have a lot of planting guides and what to look for. And you could actually cut and paste any of that into a specification you need to, or use it in a meeting if you have a stakeholders meeting with contractors, engineers, subcontractors, something like that. And so somewhere in this diagram of all of these people, owners, GCs, subcontractors, the state entity, like maybe DECR or DEQ, local inspectors and engineers, and the actual owner of the land, there's a lot of understanding that has to go on to establish something like a pollinator mix or a native seed mix. Reclamation mix is not so much, but there's really a lot to delve in, and everybody needs to be on the same page if you're using this. So I hope that that's helped you today. That's kind of a wrap up. I see some questions. Please chime in with any other questions and we'll start to answer them. I really appreciate everybody jumping on board. A lot of you have done this before with us and get PDHs. If you see the ECSproductsva.com number down there, website down there, and then the number, you can go on there and put your information in and use that access code there to get a PDH generated, and it will come to your email typically within 2 to 3 days. So a couple of questions I'll start with. So what's suggested for the month of October? I guess, sorry about that. I guess our nurse crop maybe didn't have October on there. Typically in October, you'll use an annual ryegrass. It may be different for every state. It says, has anyone in Virginia considered using small cattle, goats, sheep to maintain solar farms? Could the site plant food, use grazing animals instead of large equipment to reach under their rays? Absolutely. That is being talked about a lot in Virginia. And I don't know anywhere in Virginia where it's being used right now, but it's being done extensively in North Carolina. North Carolina had the solar boom, and then it came up here to Virginia. So there's definitely some of that going on out now. Not really cattle, because they would probably run into a panel and could destroy it. Not really goats, because they would eat the wires and everything else. But there is a lot of sheep that's being used to maintain solar farms and grazing. And then when you get into that, there's mixes. We have actually done a lot of helped with a lot of specification on pasture land grasses and pasture seeds, so that they could actually be grazed, and which ones are best for sheep, and using a temporary seed cover that won't hurt them when they come back and plant something for the long term. So let's see if there's any other questions out here. One says, do you have any standards specifications for wetland and native seed mixes? Yes, we do. If that's something you're looking for, you can actually just give me a buzz or shoot me an email and tell me where you're planning and where your job site is and what you're looking for, and we can certainly help you with something like that. All right, so let me see. I think that might be most of them that have come through. I think so. We had a good group today. Again, next month we have another webinar where Dwayne King, who works for us, is going to be on with me and joining me, and he's going to be talking about erosion control and stormwater issues and challenges on solar farms. I know a lot of you have insight into that and questions about that, and we've done a lot of that. We talked about solar farms some today, just by nature of the pollinator program. So please join us next month. Go ahead and get registered for that. I'm going to sign off now, and I really appreciate everybody joining us. Hope to see you at some conferences and at our demo day in person, and I hope to see you more on our webinars in the future. Thanks again.